Hello, my name is John Reynolds. On this episode of Extraordinary Life Stories, I'm talking to Andrew Tallents. Andrew is the founder of the Tallents Partnership and a best-selling author specialising in leadership development. If you're an ambitious leader wanting to fulfil your professional and personal dreams, then it's likely this conversation will be of particular interest. Andrew has a 30-year career supporting CEOs and founders in growing their organisations and fulfilling their own potential as leaders. He worked for global B2B service organisations prior to establishing the Tallents Partnership in 2017. Leadership fascinates me, and I'm keen to learn from Andrew what makes a truly great leader and what are the most common mistakes made in leadership. I'm very much looking forward to my conversation with Andrew. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell me, who is Andrew Tallents?
Well, that's a really good question. I ask that a lot of the people I work with, and I think most entrepreneurs, leaders would usually give you an answer which is two-dimensional about I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a leader, I'm trying to create everything. And I did that before 2017. And then in 2017, I was coached by a really, really impressive individual, and they kept asking the question, who are you? So over the last 7 years, I've actually started to learn who I am. And now I can say to you, I'm a grandfather, first and foremost, age 54. Yeah, I know I don't look like that old, but I'm a father to 3 children, a husband to a wife. I'm actually a brother as well, to a brother. So for me, they're the important things. And then I'm an entrepreneur. And that's how I flip my life around.
Family first.
So, family first, because if I've got well-being there, it means that I can serve customers in that sense. So, but it's an evolving journey.
I love that. Taking you back to a young Andrew growing up, what did you want to be?
I wanted to be a footballer. I remember spending every summer, I grew up in the 70s, so we had a lot of hot summers then. I remember just playing football, dawn to dusk every single day. And I wanted to play for Man United. I was a Man United fan. Never saw George Best, my dad did, and I wanted to play that. Now, unfortunately, reality kicked in when I was 15 because my dad worked away in Saudi Arabia. Mum had a nervous breakdown. And suddenly I was the eldest brother of 2, and that all went, the dreams of wanting to do something like that. It was all about working hard, looking after the family. And so that was my connection with, what drove me as a leader really after that. So I discovered that early on.
So there's some shaping there for lived experience.
Yeah, which I didn't know at the time really that was happening to me, but that's been through my life until age 47.
Of course. So life got serious at that point. What was the career trajectory that ultimately takes you into leadership?
Well, I was very fortunate. I came into the utility industry and I was on a graduate scheme in an industry that had just been privatised, lots of money around, so I grabbed every single opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Then I fell into recruitment, Norman Broadbent in the mid-90s, and became a recruitment consultant.
Yeah.
And that taught me the skill of selling and building relationships with people. And I stayed in that industry for about 5 or 10 years and had my first leadership role toward the end of that. And what I learned is that you actually just need to have the great people around you. You need to know your weaknesses, you need to know where your strengths are. And I thought I was a good leader until I actually became a coach in 2017, retrained, and then I started working with many more leaders and saw the good and the bad, in those leadership styles.
That's interesting. So I'll take you back though. So in terms of becoming a leadership coach in 2017, what made you want to do that?
Well, that's a good question. There were lots of things happening, I think. So there were some push factors from where I'd been for 13 years in the company I was in. It was about a natural time to leave. I didn't have anything to go to, so I just set up my own business with a £30,000 loan at the time, which was very scary for my wife.
Yeah.
Kids were, being educated at that point.
And were you already entrepreneurial before that? Because that's a big step.
Well, it's interesting. I actually said about 6 months prior to doing that to somebody else that I would never set my own business up.
So what changed there?
I think it was the fact that it dawned on me that I had something bigger to give than just what I was doing. It was one of those moments where you either dream or you wake up one morning and I thought, I'm 47 years old and am I really doing the best to serve what I can serve? So something bigger entered my life in terms of the opportunity to coach. Didn't really know the benefits of that time of it, but I got into it and retrained. And suddenly a whole new world opened up to me.
It feels like, from what you said as well, you were almost, well, you're going to probably agree with this very much, you're learning all the time, but you ultimately said you didn't know what a leader really was until you almost became the coach and learned from so many people you've been mentoring and coaching. Give me some examples, give me some feedback.
I think, and again, hopefully the audience can relate to this, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs and leaders actually have this inbuilt mechanism to be able to lead through what's come from their experience in childhood. And normally that is about hyperachiever, it's about resilience, it's about actually having really clear focus and targets, and always being single-minded. And you could argue sometimes verging on narcissistic, because actually it's all about me and how can I succeed. And we're not very good normally as leaders to actually ask for help because we rely on our own resources. So I'd seen examples of heroic leadership where people are saying, follow me over the trenches. But I saw a different type of leadership when I became a coach, which I started to learn from, which is much more servant leadership. You know, how do I be in service of the people that I'm here to lead? Yes. What do they need from me? And really listening and engaging with that, as opposed to I know all the answers, follow me. And they were the two distinct styles.
But what's interesting is essentially in their environment, those two styles of leadership worked at that time, unless you say otherwise.
No, they did, yeah. But I think times have changed now. I think times really have changed. The emergence of women into leadership roles, where they've got a very different leadership style. You could argue maybe 10, 15 years ago, women had to behave like men to get to the top of the organizations, but they don't need to do that anymore. They can use their female skills.
That's fascinating, because I've got two daughters. So a big why behind the program, big why behind talking to you is to inspire them. And for me to learn, for me to be able to demonstrate and show that times are changing, because glass ceilings and women I've interviewed on this very program have got experience of just, being good enough, but actually not being chosen for the role. Is that really changing now? Because it feels like it.
I think so, because I think now women are actually having more ownership. They're having more opportunities to state how they want to work. You look at what COVID did in terms of proving that people could work from home 2 or 3 days a week, which means I can have a child, look after childcare, have family around me and still do my job. I don't need to travel all the miles that maybe you've insisted I did when before COVID. So there's real opportunities there. And again, women have fantastic communication skills compared to men. They're very good at managing various stakeholders and less single-minded in that sense. So a lot to learn from women in terms of how men can lead better.
It's great to hear that. You're the perfect person for me to ask what would make a great leader in terms of the attributes. If you could pick 3 things, what would they be?
They're quite simple to explain, but really difficult to achieve in my experience.
Interesting.
So the first is most leaders I've worked with have a really clear vision about what it is they're here to do, whether that's working for an organization or being an entrepreneur. So if you ask them, they're very clear what they're here to serve. They don't necessarily know how they're going to get there yet, but they have a clear vision. So that's the first thing. And they're able to communicate that vision clearly. The second thing is they know exactly where they are right now. Most people have rose-tinted glasses about, well, I'm actually further ahead or further behind. But have a real reality check. I know where I am. I know what resources I need. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm bad at. It's that real awareness about where they are right now. And then the third thing is they become very aware of how they're going to get in their own way of going from where they are right now to where it is they're going. And that calls for self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and increasingly more presence. You and I are very present in this. It's just you and I in this room. Sure. Most leaders find it very difficult to be present because you've got to clear your head of everything else apart from what's going on in this moment right now.
That's interesting. So, as a coach, you knew this was coming. Yeah. How do you go about instilling that? Is that habit forming? Is that kind of giving examples that then people can relate to in their environment? How do you coach that?
Yeah, the best way to get a leader to relate to that is actually ask them how they show up in various relationships. Okay. So stakeholder relationships, personal relationships, business relationships, and get them to become really aware of whether they're really investing the right amount of time in them. And inevitably they're not. So it's really getting them to connect with that. And then the 2 hours they spend with me each time they meet with me every month, we've got this really safe space where we're both present. They practice it. They learn what takes them away from that focus. And then they learn about coping strategies to go back into the real world and actually try and become more present. Now, you've seen the best leaders around who actually have time for everybody. They're very calm. Doesn't matter what's happening. The feet underneath are probably working fine, but everyone sees they're very calm. Yeah. And that's presence. And it's very difficult to achieve in this busy world.
Totally. I'm interested to know at what stage a leader would come to you. And what I mean by that is, I guess a smart leader, if you could call someone that, comes to you early. They know where they want to go. Yep. They've got the ideas, but let's get it right. Then there'll be someone that will come to you where they're potential entrepreneur and they're trailblazing, but actually then they realise they've made some mistakes or they brought the wrong people in, or whatever, and then it's almost a bit more of a crisis. Yeah. Do you have sort of one more or the other, or a bit of both, or what's the sort of?
It depends where they are in their career. A lot of leaders stay very successful by doing the things they've always done, and then they get to a stage where actually maybe they've got some key stakeholder management issues to deal with, and they can't do it for whatever reason. They're not in relationship. Yep. So they come to me on that occasion and we work about how they manage those relationships more effectively. Or sometimes it's just that they're stuck. They just can't move forward and they don't know why, because they've been very successful all these years. And again, that's identifying what is it within them that's actually blocking them,
Yeah.
and it is usually something within them. I'm very aware with most people I work with, they say to me, well, I'm not going to be successful because investors will do this and the market will go against us. But I truly believe that every single leader can achieve their goals just by getting out of their own way. So if they realize that and they want to learn, as opposed to change everybody else around them, which is where sometimes it starts. I need to change my FD or my sales director because they're not performing. Well, how are you affecting that relationship? And is that why they're not performing? The way that you come across in that relationship.
And I imagine with some leaders, you'll get resistance from that. You get pushback. Others will embrace that. And do you find that some of the people that resist that will resist it to the point where you can't do any more and they won't? Or do you typically find that you come at it from enough angles that you're able to demonstrate and show, and then that breaks that?
What we do is something called contracting right at the start of our relationship. So if I was working with you, I'd ask you, how do you respond to challenge? You know, when resistance comes up and you don't really want to move forward, how do you want me to try and release that? By challenging you. Now, a lot of CEOs and leaders and entrepreneurs don't get a lot of challenge from their direct reports because they're the people that actually drive things forward, and they can be quite scary sometimes and, you know, very focused. So within that space, we actually do that. And sometimes I'm very robust. And actually they get a bit of a jolt because nobody's ever spoken to me like that before. Yeah. So that's how we unleash some of the resistance, just to dissipate a little bit with that jolt, to say, actually, there's a different way of looking at this. But you've got to be strong with that. I like that. Imposter syndrome is talked about a lot. We're sort of moving to the mental health side of things, but I've suffered from that. Scaling a business, the numbers got big. I was bringing in people that felt like the right thing to do, were far brighter than me, that could run certain departments. And then very much almost felt guilty at times. I had time on my hands, which was deliberately to shape the business and so on. But you were having moments where like, how have I done this? Yeah. And am I the right person to be doing this? What experience have you got where potentially at a certain point, it might be an entrepreneur or a founder is coming through a journey, and they might be not the right CEO. They might not be the right leader for that moment. Are you the one that potentially guides them with that and shapes that and say, you need to now become the FD because that's what you actually enjoy, and bring in a CEO? How much of what you do involves that? Yeah, it's a really good question. And there are two elements to that. So the first is, if that leader comes to me and what they're actually presenting with is about a self-limiting belief.
Yes.
That is behind that, well, I'm not sure if I should be the CEO. That's where I can coach to try and instill belief that if they've got the skills, from my perspective, they should continue doing that. It's about removing the self-limiting belief, which comes from our childhood.
Yeah.
Or they actually are in a conscious leadership state, so they're actually not being limited by that self-belief. They're actually feeling positive or neutral about the position they're in, and they're recognizing they're not the right person because they're present to that, and they actually recognize they need resources around them that are different. In that occasion, I would work with them to work out, well, how do they exit that particular position the right way so that all the stakeholders are bought into it, and then allow them to move into that position. So it depends where they're coming from with it. It's usually the former.
The word I'd use that kind of gets involved in this is ego.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, there's a founder or a leader that will not step aside because I am the right person, or I came up with the idea, so I have to. I imagine that's a tough person to deal with.
It is, and there's no point in working with them as a coach, and they probably wouldn't employ a coach, to be honest. You know, because again, if they've got the ego so strong, what can I potentially teach them?
Yes.
So you're right. I do get presented to some CEOs by chairs. Who want them to be worked on. And after the first meeting, I usually know whether it's going to work or not, because if they're not going to let you in, there's no point. It doesn't matter who's going to work with them.
Ego is interesting because, you know, 10 years ago, two men talking as openly as we are now, highly likely it wouldn't have happened. And for me, the ego side of things would have stopped potentially myself 10 years ago, even wanted to come and talk to someone like yourself and other leaders, because I can do this. Yeah. You know, I should be able to do this. How much of that is changing now and for the better?
I think it is changing. I think it's slow. I think where it can change is where you hear your peer group having a coach or having some support, and then you're curious about that. Oh, how has that worked? You know, how did it work for you? And maybe I could consider that. But it's about peer pressure in a way.
Yes.
You're actually you're missing out. It's fear of missing out, isn't it? So that's one element. I still think some people are pushed into it, and usually that's either by seeking therapy and recognizing actually there's something here that needs to be worked on, from a coaching perspective. But even I today find it very difficult to open up, you know, to people who I don't really know and be vulnerable, because I've still got that within me.
Yes.
In terms of certain things. I was over in Canada last week at a conference, and I opened up to this woman I'd never met before, and I just started crying, you know, because one of the things that came up for me was something from my childhood, which she related to, and it was a situation with her husband. So I was given the space, somebody was listening to me, came up with a similar situation, I related to it and I connected. We don't get enough of those opportunities around people. So it's getting better, but I think men particularly need to be open to being listened to and just sharing how they're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning from you right now. We haven't talked before this program, so for me, it's a genuine interest in finding out, and relatability. And I think that's a key thing for you, because you've been through your own business journey, and then you have so much experience coming from others. You mentioned childhood a few times. It feels like a lot is shaped from childhood. To the point where you cried with someone last week, and I think how much of that really is kind of carried through into people's career, and what can be done in the education curriculum. Because if we know this, and if you know this, can we not put something in place in schools that's teaching mindfulness, teaching mental health, alongside Bunsen burners and things that we don't really use so much today?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it depends what your childhood's like. So either you had a protected childhood, which sometimes can lead to trauma because you're not released into the world to make your own decisions, or it can be you've had obviously trauma from abuse or being left out or neglected, or your father or mother dying when you were young. So there's all these different factors. But independent of that, if you are in school and you're taught actually how to learn, that's the first thing, not about learning things, but how to learn, how to be curious, how to actually become very aware of your feelings, and it's okay to share them, and do more of that within school as well, and have facilitated sessions around that.
Yes.
I think that would be really advantageous, because then, in fact, there are some schools doing it now, they call it around sort of character building. So they have part of the curriculum which actually looks at character, and that's as important. UA 92, which Gary Neville's involved in, looks at the whole person when they leave the university, and how they apply their personality, learning from their trauma. So I think we can manage it, but it's about becoming aware and not losing it, because it's part of us, but recognizing when it shows up and when it's not helpful.
Yes.
And when we can do that, it means we can start managing it. But so many people are not aware about how their trauma shows up.
You articulate that really well. And actually, just talking to you now, there's the leadership coach and specialist that you are, but you cross over almost into therapy. If I was going to be talking to you about what I'm trying to achieve with my goals and my business, it brings it right back to, well, who are you? What's driving you? And so, that must be a big part of what you do to understand that sort of therapy side of things.
It is. If you look at coaching over the last 20 years, we started with coaching where it was a good listening ear for a leader. Then we moved into probably 10 years ago where it was all about actually challenging from a coaching perspective, engaging a bit more.
Yes.
And then we're now into this area where a lot of coaches are trained psychodynamically like me, where we use the kind of therapeutic elements in theory. We're not therapists, but we understand that our mind is actually driving the way that we behave and have our self-limiting beliefs. So we have an essence about an understanding of it, but as I said before, it's about looking forward using that information as opposed to looking back, where a therapist would really focus. But the skills are the same. The level of qualifications are different.
Interesting. A lot of people will come to you potentially with a desire to be successful. You've been successful career, set up a successful business. As we sit here now, how would you define success?
That's a really good question. And it's what my why is, really. So most of the people I work with, including me up until a few years ago, define success in terms of work. So I've achieved this, I've become the leader of this, I've made this much money, I've made this much profit, I've served this many customers. What they never say is, and also what I've done is improve my relationships with my family. I've been there for them. I've been there to see my daughter at the sports day. I've been there for my mother when she's been elderly. We never say those things, even though they're there in the background. So for me, success is about looking somebody in the eye and saying, personal success and professional success, how do you balance those and make sure they're as important to you as opposed to just doing one or the other? Because some people will sacrifice professional success and focus on personal stuff. Yeah, you can do both. I've proven that, and many leaders have proven that.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, family just keeps coming to the front. Again, both.
I've got two daughters as well. So
absolutely. But I'm interested to know that question I just asked you. If I'd asked you that 10, 15 years ago, you've already said you'd have answered it differently. But how have you managed to juggle being in business, being an entrepreneur, and having that quality time with family and time for yourself?
Yeah.
Because I imagine it's different 10 years ago, 15 years ago to where you're at now.
Absolutely. So 10 years ago, I was a workaholic. I drank too much. I was not really there for my family, went through one divorce. So for me, that wasn't sustainable. And actually it was COVID, and you may be able to relate to this, where I actually was forced to slow down.
Yeah.
I didn't have anywhere to go. I had to sit in that office at home, go for walks when I could, but it slowed me down. I thought to myself, this is what I want in life. I want to actually go a different pace and just slow down. So from that day in 2020, whenever it was,
March,
I just made a decision that I'm going to be on my terms now. This is when I'm going to play golf. This is when I'm going to work really hard. This is when my clients can access me. and it was on my terms. And that takes a lot of self-discipline to actually then believe you can still achieve the same level of profitability or more doing what you're in service of. So it is that self-disciplining and self-leadership, but it was that was forced me to do it. And that kind of incident is not always there for people.
No. And it was interesting that it was a forced situation, an external event that has probably made you a better leader.
Yes.
And therefore a better leadership coach. But coming off the treadmill, so to speak, so in context of making more time for the family, making more time for yourself as well, is that what changed from 2017? You were actually able to make that time?
Absolutely, because it was my time, wasn't it? Now, it's very easy for me to say as an entrepreneur rather than being an employee, but actually it's hard being an entrepreneur. And we've still got to carve out the time. So that was the big thing for me. My wife benefited, my family benefited, and yet my clients benefited because from a personal well-being perspective, I was there. I was in a good space. I was actually present for them, which I wasn't when I'm going from one meeting to the one meeting and thinking about what am I doing here? So what I find working with many leaders is they're always complaining about the fact they can't create space and time for the well-being. But what I say to them is you're actually choosing to do that, particularly if you own your own business. But even if you're not in your own business and you're the CEO or leader, you can choose to spend the time the way you want to. And that's a really important point of self-leadership.
I'm guilty of that. I totally get the accountability and the fact that I can make my own time my own, but then I will still blame this happened, that happened. And actually you just need to come back to the fact that, well, I should be running my time. We are filming in the JAAQ studio, Just Ask a Question, the social media mental health platform. You just found out about it.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
I love it. What are three things I love about it? So the first is it's really accessible. You go in, you actually just type in what it is that you want to know about, and immediately this plethora of information comes up for you, which is really personal because of the way it's done in terms of the filming. So for a lot of people that are actually struggling out there that actually want to know something about the issues they're facing, it just allows you to really connect with it very quickly.
Yes.
I also love the fact that it's different people, a variety of people. And again, you relate to certain stories and just think, well, actually, I can really resonate with that.
Yes.
And I did a few of them that I went in, to look at that. And then the third is it's actually learning something about what you might be considering as an issue for you. Yes. So whether that's some form of addiction or just well-being or space, and there's real experts in there as well. So for me, I just thought it was a great resource for people who don't feel they can open up to people and can go on there and just learn a little bit more about where their journey might be going and just give them some courage to move to the next step.
You've articulated that really well. I think it's crucial that people that either aren't brave enough or will choose to talk to family, friends, a doctor, colleagues, and also relatives that are suffering, and actually giving them information. And I don't know, I'm sure you know this, but the most searched for in terms of mental health is TikTok, which is terrifying. It's just, influencers that are effectively just giving information that's potentially not correct and so on. In your capacity as a leadership specialist, I'm really interested to know what you do to keep yourself both mentally and physically fit. Because there's so many things, like there's ice baths, there's yoga, there's breathing exercises. What works for you?
So I have a structure. So every single morning I meditate. So I use TM, Transcendental Meditation, with a sort of a mantra. It's 20 minutes, that's all I need in the morning. And that really clears my head and makes me feel good for the day. Then I walk the dog. So I have a dog and make sure that's in my diary. So my PA doesn't put anything into there.
Fresh air.
Fresh air, but also the walk and the connection with the dog. I mean, the dog's always present. And it's amazing how that connection with something that's present with you really levels you.
Interesting.
So just 40 minutes walk with Ollie, the dog. And then during the day, again, I make sure I create lots of space and time. If I'm feeling a little bit busy or a bit of frenetic, I'll just get up and change the energy, walk. Maybe do a cool walk, remove itself, get into nature again. We can talk on the phone, you can do that kind of stuff. And then for me, when I switch off completely, it's golf. So again, there's a lot of similarity. For me, it's about up here, it's about being present, walking for 4 hours, but more importantly with friends.
Connections.
The phone's never on, nobody can get me. All my clients know that, so they're the main things.
I was very interested to know what you'd say on that, because there must be so many different people that you ultimately coach, and you've probably got to try and work out where to suggest certain things would work for them. I mentioned some of the things earlier, and one of the other things is reading.
Yes.
I remember a number of people quote, successful CEOs and leaders read a lot. Do you read a lot?
I do. My wife says to me she can't understand how much I read. I've got a Kindle. Now I do like books still, but I've got a Kindle I read every night. So I read probably about an hour a night.
And a mixture of fiction and non-fiction, or are you always researching? You're always on that growth mindset?
No, a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. I like biographies as well, really, to learn about people. And but for me, learning about myself and how I can connect better with my work is always important to me. So but I like a good range.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many different leadership books out there. What would be one or maybe two that you would recommend?
Well, I'm going to suggest a couple of out there which are a bit different. So the first is called Quantum Mind by Arnold Mindell. And what I love about the book, for people out there that have got a scientific mind or analytical mind, which is a lot of entrepreneurs, and want to reconnect with who they are as a person, it talks about the history of mathematics, physics and psychology, and how they're all coming together to enable leaders to learn how to let go. And it's a fascinating book, really well written book. And the second one is by Frederic Laloux. It's called Reinventing Organizations. That talks about how employees out there now, younger people, are taking back self-leadership and how organizations need to react to that. So a lot of people would learn a lot from that. It's a fascinating book. So they're the two. And I tend to read a bit of fiction as well. And
podcasts, I mean, they're becoming, and rightly so, I think they're brilliant. And on the move, you can, if you wanted to, you can listen to it on the dog walk, you can listen to it in the car, train journey, whatever it might be. You've got your own podcast.
I have, yeah.
What podcasts would you recommend that you've listened to twice? And then tell me about your own one.
Yeah, I do like The Diary of a CEO because it's just got a lot of different sort of contexts in there, a lot of variety. But the one that's really interesting for entrepreneurs and leaders is by Greg McKeown, McKeown, and he writes about essentialism. And his podcast is about essentialism. And what he talks about is the ruthless pursuit of less. And it's a really interesting concept. So his podcast, everyone should just listen to it, because it gives you ideas about how can I do less tomorrow to be more effective. And entrepreneurs really struggle with that. Totally.
That's intriguing to me.
Yeah,
I'll
enjoy that one.
And tell me about your own podcast. What's the why behind it?
Yeah, so it's called Confessions of a Successful Leader. It is based around chief executives and leaders, entrepreneurs who recognize that trauma has informed their leadership style. They learned about that at some time in their lives, and they've done something about changing it, really harnessing it, and they want to share it with the world so that other leaders can learn. Actually, it's not a difficult thing to do. It's actually something that you can work through that's a real superpower, and actually make it into something that's your leadership style. So it's really vulnerable, it's a bit gritty, and we're broadcasting in the new year for that. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. I feel like I could talk to you all day, Andrew. You've got so much information there, but that's all I've got time for. But I've learned so much, and thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.